Hello everyone, I am Brian Easton, the author of the autobiography of a werewolf hunter series, and the Werewolf Bar is open. Welcome to Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter, folks. Thanks for stopping by this evening for a taste of whiskey and werewolves as we wind down this summer of 2023. We're glad to have the whole Werewolf Bar team assembled this month. Amanda, Tex, and Doc are all back in the saddle after various absences, and we're all ready to go. So let's get things started the right way with our creature of the night. Now this time around, I've got a bottle of Bentley's blended whiskey that I picked up at my local grocer's for $6.97. It was one of only a couple left on the shelf, and it was on the bottom shelf, I should say, and I almost passed it over because it was so cheap, therefore probably very bad. But in the interest of trying something different, I picked it up to share with you tonight. And if I wind up pouring the whole thing down the drain, I'm not out much. So I don't know why I'm going to do this to myself. But $6.97 a blended whiskey. Bentley's. To you. Well, it's not nearly as atrocious as I was prepared for it to be. It definitely tastes like a budget blended whiskey, though. But it's not rubbish, not something I would want to sit around and sip, but mixed with something, yeah, I mean, I've definitely had worse, and at the higher price points, too. Well, for the last couple of months, we've been telling you about some upcoming releases that we're going to be bringing you, and you're going to be interested in hearing about those if you haven't already. First thing to say on this subject is that the release of the Winter Fox Journals Book 2 is exactly 1 week from today. That's the second edition of the Michael Winter Fox Journals, due to go live Tuesday, August the 22nd. That's continuing the story of Michael Winter Fox, and should be immediately available on ebook and print, and then the Audible version should be coming your way sometime before the end of the year, we hope. I think you're going to like what's in store for you in this edition, in this chronicling of Michael's life, and I think it's safe to say you're going to encounter some unexpected surprises along the way. But I'll leave that for you to decide once you've had a chance to sit down with it. So we're excited about that. And then looking down the road to the winter of 2024, perhaps next February, we've got a second edition of the Legends of the Werewolf Hunter anthology coming your way. Now, that one will not be written by yours truly, but like the first, a collection of authors have contributed to the story that will in some way link to the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter canon series, or the Sylvesterverse, as established in that series, either by plot point or character. Here's a quick peek at some of the talent you can expect to see in this new anthology. And in addition to the intrepid souls that you just saw, we also have contributions from Miles Booth, our own Amanda Rogers from Amanda Asks, and we just added a new name to the roster, Mr. W.J. Pittman, who is an old friend of mine from back home who heard the tales of Sylvester and Michael many years before they were published. So we're glad to have him on board. Welcome aboard the crazy train, and it does get crazy. I'll tell you from firsthand experience that when you're writing a story of any kind of size, the bigger the story, the more complications you develop. That's what they call the inner workings of a watch, you know, complications. And if we take that analogy of all the little gears and cogs that make a watch work and apply it to storytelling, well, you can see how all the chances to make a mistake are in no short supply and just keep coming. Even more so if you build your story into a book series like we have. It's tough not to get your wires crossed and to keep your information straight. And while this is true for everybody who sits down to write a story or a poem or a screenplay, we're fortunate to have Amanda Rogers to help us keep some of this stuff straight when it's not all that easy to do. So we're glad to have Amanda Rogers back with us tonight. And without further prelude, here she is with edition of Amanda Asks.
Hey Brian, been a while. Everybody on the internet, hi. What we wondered today is there any way to save a werewolf after they've been turned? There was an intimation, spoilers for the lineage, at the very end where he's dealing with Rhea Silvia Lupa. I'm not sure if that's metaphysical saving. Is there a physical way to save them, to bring them back from the beast? Or is it once you're gone, you're gone? That's what I wonder. What do you wonder?
Very good question, and one that frankly I have kind of wondered if it would ever come up. Can a werewolf, once it's transformed, be saved? Now we know from the books that there is a certain amount of leeway with someone who has been marked and has yet to transform, especially if that person is a person of faith, as was the case with the character of Caleb in Harwintown in the adventure from Book 1. But even then, he was not spared from the transformation. He just fought against it and the complete loss of his soul better than anyone else that we had seen up until that point. But what Amanda seems to be referring to is the prerogative that Alaric, aka the Kinslayer, the firstborn of the sons of Esau, is prepared to invoke over Rhea Silvia Lupa, who is, after all, Sylvester's mother, formerly known as Abigail. Now, we could go into whether or not this was a test for Sylvester, or this was a test for Rhea Silvia Lupa, but the bottom line is that Alaric, as the eldest, had the power and he had the right to rescind, as he put it, the mark that was placed upon her. It was completely within his power to withdraw that legacy from her veins and make her essentially human again. So yes, we're talking about a metaphysical work here, done by a wolf who has the power to do it, who has the authority, might be a better word, to do it. And to literally extract the wolven, the marked person's portion of the Therian soul, and take it as his own. But what is most interesting to me, and it's something that I'm really surprised hasn't come up until now, is a few lines located near the first chapter of the very first book, Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. Let me read you what it says here. I asked him, this is Sylvester narrating, talking to Michael, I asked him out of dumb curiosity if there were any hope for someone who'd been marked. Okay, so it's the same question that Amanda has brought to us tonight. To my surprise, he said there was a certain ceremony that was supposed to undo the bite, but he knew of no one who had tried it. So we know that there is at least a chance of it happening. That we know that there is a ritual associated with undoing a werewolf's deliberate mark or the provenance of the birthmark, as it's known in this mythology. Whether it works or not, we don't know, because Michael doesn't know. And if Michael doesn't know, who the hell does? Okay? But that's not the end of the discussion between Sylvester and Michael. And again, this can be found in the first chapter of the first book, near the closing pages. And right after we read what I just read to you, the waters get immediately deeper with Winter Fox's next reply. It all depends, Michael began. The more powerful the monster, the less likely he is to be killed or his bite undone. Now, this shouldn't come as a total surprise, because we know that the stronger the Wolven, the more resilient they are to Silver and the Moon, and their chances of dying without some sort of concentrated effort to bring it about. All Michael's really saying here is that whatever ritual he's referring to has less chance of working against a powerful werewolf, presumably Noble Wolven or High Wolven, but he goes on. The only other way is to kill the offending wolf, he added. But I have heard of bites strong enough to survive even that. So beyond this ceremony that he has knowledge of and is referring to, never mind that he has no evidence for its effectiveness or, if it works at all, Michael tells us that a bite can be rescinded by killing the offending wolf. So what does all that mean? The books haven't gotten into it any further than that little snippet that I read you, because it's not come up yet. But what Michael appears to be telling us is that it is definitely possible in certain situations, certain circumstances, when someone who is marked by a werewolf can shed himself of that birthmark if they are able to kill the werewolf which marked them, which bit them. This is a powerhouse of a statement, considering all that comes after in the following books. And one I've never been asked about or even indirectly questioned on until tonight. And I think that's all I'll say about that particular subject for now. I'll give those who like to chew on these kinds of things a while to perhaps divine what some of these things could imply for the future of the series. And this is just a case in point of why I appreciate Amanda so much, and why her questions have a way of tapping away at the exterior of things to get to that meaty bit inside. Thanks so much for the question, Amanda. And if you have something you'd like to ask on the show, just be sure to send Amanda an email at the email address that you saw at the end of her segment. And so, here's the part of the show where we switch gears and move from the inquisitive side of the show to what you might call the business end, as in the business end of a shotgun. Tex Grebner is back online tonight with some gritty details that come with hunting werewolves, or monsters of any stripe, really. And in the future of this segment, we may see more of those monsters and the weapons formed against them. But for now, let's load a couple of barrels of Triple-Aught silver buckshot and check in with Tex and Tools of the Trade.
Howdy folks, Tex Grebner here. Welcome to Tools of the Trade here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I hope you guys are going to enjoy this month's episode, because I get some dramatic results with the humble yet devastating shotgun. And we're going to be talking about the shotgun as it pertains to monsters and monster hunting. Thing is, the shotgun is a very innocuous weapon. In many cases extremely powerful, but unaggressive and unassuming enough that it'll be one of the last things the gun control agenda comes for in a rapidly approaching dystopian future, or for the globe-trotting monster hunter, it's much easier to get in and out of countries that may already have draconian gun control in place. And in many cases, people aren't going to ask a whole bunch of questions about a standard configuration shotgun. Now, Sounder is in how to configuration cut down side-by-side Mad Max looking 10 gauge. However, that's kind of the outlier. Now, the shotgun as a paradox, meaning the style of gun, is devastating because you can throw a really big single projectile at close range. I mean, there are very few werewolves that Sylvester and Michael have killed in the books that I have read so far that they took a shot over 20 or 30 yards. So when I say paradox, I'm referring to the tiger hunting firearms prior to the Nitro Express calibers, where it was 12 bore, 10 bore, 8 bore, 4 bore. That's a single projectile. You can use buckshot and you can use ball, even though normally it's a conical projectile, not necessarily a ball. Ball meaning Minier ball. We're going to talk a little bit of physics here. The shotgun shell has a finite amount of energy, meaning that if you add more projectiles to this finite amount of energy, it will slow everything down. Now, in cases of, real world stuff, even though we do take the lunatic fringe seriously here on Tools of the Trade, if you were to, say, try to kill a grizzly bear when it's all you've got as a game ranger, and so on, you would want the Minier ball Foster style slug. However, on the werewolf hunter side of things, silver that punches through doesn't have nearly the effect as silver that stays in the body of our monsters. So the shotgun, pretty much anything that you can load that shell with, as long as it's going to come down the barrel safely, you can, for instance, as Sylvester did, basically hacksaw apart silver projectiles that he pulled out of bullets and loaded his shotgun shells with. However, you could, honestly, it won't be very pure, but it will still be pretty devastating, take the sterling silver rod and just cut it into buckshot-sized pieces to make right angle flechettes that are more of a square pellet, as long as they're properly sized and you properly stack them in the shotgun shell. It's a pretty accessible fix as a monster hunter, so to speak. But at close range, especially on a home invasion, if you hit, this area, they're gonna need fingerprints because they're not really doing dental records. Don't worry, you'll see. Well, I did promise dramatic results, and truth be told, the shotgun often gets overlooked as a monster hunter's weapon because just like how with, let's say, the jacketed silver projectiles, it just would make too much sense. It's not enough of a MacGuffin tile solution. However, I hope you guys have enjoyed this month's episode of Tools of the Trade here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I gotta say, something such as a Sega 12, the AK variant of a 12 gauge, that in crank-off configuration with silver buckshot, you could make a real mess with that.
Tex is oh so right about the shotgun. And I mean, here you basically have what amounts to one of the most devastating weapons at close range that you can have. And yet it is among the most overlooked of them all, just like Tex said. And I think one of the reasons why it's so overlooked is because the shotgun evokes some kind of old-timey granddad kept in his closet type of a thing and it's so boisterous and it's so commonplace, it gets passed up, for firearms which are much sexier and much more in the vein of today's popular culture. Something John Wick might own, or some outlandish futuristic looking weapon from the latest high-end video game. Now I know I've had this on the show before, and I believe it was back somewhere around season 1. But because we're talking about shotguns, and because Tex specifically referred to Sounder, which is Sly's 10-gauge scattergun, with a pistol grip and rabbit ear hammers, I thought that I would show you one more time the closest thing I have to that highly illegal firearm of Sylvester's. So this is a former goose gun, as most 10-gauge shotguns start out. But as you can see, the barrels have been significantly cut down, and the handle formed into a kind of a pistol grip. But if you can imagine these barrels, a good 6 inches or so shorter, say around in here, or probably even down in here, we would get rid of that forearm. And with rabbit ear hammers on the outside of each side, you get a pretty good idea of what Sounder would look like. Something like this would be a handful, to say the least, especially if it's fired with one hand and both barrels, just as Sylvester used it in Siberia when he killed the darkest wolven from jumping from the top of the wrecked train. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the power of the shotgun. Perfectly acceptable instrument for hunting waterfowl 1 minute, and the next capable of killing the biggest, baddest werewolf breed there is. That's my dust up. Thanks, Tex, for the demonstrations and always for your insight into weaponry. It's one of the most devastating weapons in the Monster Hunter's toolkit. Well, for several months now, Dr. T. Broussard has been sharing his Occult Primer series, Doc Talk Shop, with us. And he's gone through an array of shape-shifting traditions, and last month he finished up our discussion of ghosts, spirits, and other non-corporal entities. Tonight begins a new chapter in his series where he's going to be talking about the multifaceted realm of magical traditions. And there are all sorts of those around the world and from various subcultures and times in history. And when we think about these things, ideas such as Gothic witchcraft or the syncretic religions of the Caribbean, maybe even the grimoires of ceremonial magic. Starting tonight and throughout the months to come, here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter, Doc is going to examine those occult systems and rites as they pertain to the book series. Here's Doc Talk Shop with Dr. T.
Greetings and welcome to Doc Talk Shop as part of Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. Tonight, we're addressing a very important topic in the world of Sylvester James Logan and the entire werewolf hunter mythos, and the connection between witchcraft and werewolves. Let me begin by saying that when I refer to witchcraft, I'm referring to a largely feminine group of magical practices, at least in terms of Western and Eastern Europe, which may or may not have positive or negative connotations. I'm not referring to the relatively young religion of Wicca or its attending traditions. Wicca is one thing, witchcraft, such as I'm referring to, is something else. Now, specifically, with regard to French witchcraft, you find that for male practitioners, what used to be called warlocks a very long time ago, males tended to involve themselves in werewolfery. Werewolfery is the magic of turning oneself into a wolf or a werewolf, a wolf-human hybrid, usually through the aid of a pelt or a salve, and more than that, involving a pact with a forest lord, which some Christian writers consider the devil. Now, witchcraft is not limited to werewolfery, but at one time, at least in France and Germany especially, both those, werewolfery was a big strain of witchcraft. Now, one who is a werewolf via this kind of thing could be a one-time event. You know, you go through the trouble of making the pelt, getting the pelt, making the pact, and so on. Go through all the rituals. And you become a wolf or some other creature one time, and that's it. You know, you've learned your one spell, you've done it, and that's the end of your witchcraft. Or it becomes a hunting modality. That's why a lot of werewolves in French history were poor, homeless men. They had to eat, so they would resort to essentially witchcraft in order to get food or get power over their enemies, things like that. So, in other parts of Europe, you got accounts of witch women doing lycanthropic or shape-shifting magic on their enemies. That's where the whole idea of Circe turning vicious men into pigs comes in. She's both a witch and a goddess, in a sense, form of Hecate, actually. And so she did the same kind of magic, and we had witchcraft. This is men that another might use them themselves to take the form of an animal and do whatever they have to do. Now, it's important to say that a werewolf via witchcraft is not the same thing as someone who was born into a line of lycanthropes or someone who didn't. So you have a real difference between, say, those like Peter Stube, who makes his pact with the devil, low-key, call it what you will, and then there are those who are directly descended from one of the Beast Princes, to use his Sylvester James Logan mythos. Yeah. So you have the born, the bitten, and then a way of saying it would be the enchanted. Yeah. Now, the good thing about being a witch or a warlock of this type is that if you don't want to continue in this process, you get rid of the pelt, you get rid of the salve, you break the pact, and a few consequences aside, you don't have to turn again. Whereas the born werewolf changes on a schedule, as does the bitten. Yeah. Now, the moon being associated with the goddess of witchcraft, also the horned god, which Christianity thinks of as the devil, obviously has its role in the intersection between witchcraft and werewolves. Now, in Eastern Europe, you'll find that there are nights devoted to the intersection between witchcraft and werewolves, as well as vampires. On those nights, one of which is November 29th, or St. Andrew's Eve, in Romania, witches, werewolves, vampires, all three are meant to meet at crossroads and perform the Sabbath and, discuss the evening's doing, and the good ones will fight the bad ones and basically figure out which side of the movement, for lack of a better term, is going to rule until the next St. Andrew's Eve. Now, it's interesting that St. Andrew being so associated with this type of thing, you'll find in the Goetia of the Lesser Key of Solomon a figure named Andras, which has traits of both a wolf and a raven. Now, the point about that is, Andras is the Hungarian form of the name Andrew. So you have the witchcraft folk tradition of Romania finding an echo in the ceremonial magic tradition of the Lesser Key of Solomon. So, and I know for a fact that there are those that have used Andras in lycanthropic rituals. So you have similar ideas in different parts of the world. One in folk magical witchcraft tradition in Eastern Europe, and then you have largely French, Western Europe in ceremonial magic, but you have the same idea in the grimoire. So, and you'll find that in many forms of witchcraft, there is some crossover between ceremonial magic via the grimoires and witchcraft, especially in the darker aspects of witchcraft. There's a lot more of a gray area between high ceremonial magic and the more simplistic, quote unquote, processes of witchcraft. Now, in areas like Africa, you'll find that rather than being female, witchcraft is more of a male province. And the witch doctor Sangoma is more often a male, but having female assistants or co-practitioners, depending on the tribe in southern West Africa. Now, interesting side note to all this. During the slave trade from Africa to the southern United States, the reason why so many of the Lord Keepers, what became known as voodoo women, is that because to avoid being sold themselves, many of the witch doctors would sell their assistance to those that came to take them as slaves. Basically, one tribe would attempt to enslave another, and some unscrupulous types, would turn in their assistants to avoid being taken as slaves themselves. And so, from this effrontery arose the idea of voodoo queens and so forth, because these assistants in the New World became the real keepers of lore, and so the tradition changed from being patriarchal to being a more matriarchal system in the New World. And that eventually filtered back into places like Haiti. And there was also the whole. So again, that's the divide between voodoo from largely Benin in West Africa to New Orleans voodoo in New Orleans, Louisiana, for example, although it's not limited to New Orleans, Louisiana, and in the world. Sidebar over, but I've always found that was interesting. Back to Sylvester James. One of the major female werewolves was always attended by witchcraft, and one of the great signs of that was the presence of magpies. Magpies are part of the corvid family, so they're related to crows and ravens, which are also related to witchcraft. And you will often find that they're related to picture spirits, magpies, especially, and in some parts of the world, Eastern Europe especially, magpies are creatures of the devil, evil spirits, soul takers, and so forth. They are also directly connected to the entity known as Astaroth, which, depending on your reading, could be seen as a male demonic figure or a female goddess, and more often than not, a combination of both, which was a major figure in some of the darker sects of witchcraft outside of Wicca. Wicca didn't have anything to do with this, but in some of the more hardcore sects of witchcraft, Astaroth is a major figure, and because it's representative of male and female, it incorporates both the god and the goddess principle as one. And one of the creatures of Astaroth, according to the Grimoire Theorem, or the true grimoire, is magpie. In other texts, you'll find that Astaroth is represented by a wolf, a lion, or a snake. Make it that way you will. Now, obviously, the wolf concerns us very much because it takes up that forest lord werewolfery theme. Magpie, as seen in Forest Scars, is very much a harbinger, an announcer of the coming of the witchcraft. And that stemmed out of magpies being among those birds that follow wolves around, because wherever the wolves are, they'll be carrion, and wherever there's carrion is, there's food. So magpies, being smart birds, will follow wolf packs and get their meal. Ravens are more known for this, but it's not unheard of. And magpies. So, with that in mind, you can see the complex of the entity Astaroth being linked to magpies and to wolves, and how that would feed into the magical or witchcraft tradition of werewolfery as an act of power. Now, in today's postmodern ideas of witchcraft, even the darker stuff, werewolfery is not as widely known or is seen as a kind of spiritual projection. I'm going to have a meditation, I'm going to experience what it is to be a wolf that way, and it'll be an empowering experience. However, in the more obscure areas of the occult world, away from pop culture and things like that, you'll find that there are those who still will go through the process of making the salve, getting a pelt, making a belt out of it, making the pack, and then actually engaging in werewolfery as a tangible act of power. And whereas in the past that was largely a male action, in the 20th century, 21st century now, it's become more egalitarian in the sense of I've heard of men and women doing it. I've even heard them doing it together, leading to, let's say, a tantric act or an act of sexual or sensual magic. Some people think that Tantra must involve Congress, but in fact, within Tantra, there's room for both the sensual and the sexual. They don't have to go together, although they often are. And these type of things, why in the Black Mass, the Black Sabbath, the Witches' Sabbath, you'll always find accounts of orgy, because bestial transformation involves dealing with animalistic urges, and of course, one urge leads to another. And if there's male and female, or in today's parlance, anything with anything, will have actions based on that. Now, again, that's referring to a witch's sabbath, as was accounted for in the old books of demonology. I have heard of it's happening at gatherings of different types of witches, but all of those were among adults and were consensual, and, well, bear that in mind. So, when you read those old accounts, you gotta remember that they were largely written down by people recording confessions acquired by torture, and that while they may have been some truth here and there, when you're under duress, you'll admit to some very strange things. And when you couple that with the fact that much of witchcraft involves herbs and other substances which can have a psychedelic effect on the brain, well, what they remember or recall may not have been what actually happened, at least in normal consciousness, as demonstrated in Sylvester James Logan's books. Those wolves that know sorcery or witchcraft, now keep in mind that sorcery is a largely French term for witchcraft, and it has a negative connotation, but isn't always negative. Those that know sorcery often use it to do different things like bind up weapons and basically cause bad luck. That is one of the benefits, if you will, of werewolfery. If you acquire that power through sorcery or witchcraft, you get other tricks along with it, because to achieve that transformation means that you must have had some other knowledge. In other words, werewolfery is a very advanced magical act. You're not going to have that right out of the gate. You're going to maybe practice some hexes first. You're going to build up to that, my point. So, such people are going to have a bigger bag of tricks. Now, there are those, of course, that limit themselves to one act of power, and, well, they know that one trick and then do it well. But it would be unusual to encounter someone who only has the one trick. Now, that may be the one trick they're best at, but they will have other tricks in the repertoire as well. Now, I will freely admit that my first real act as an occultist was an act of werewolfery, as I've described in a previous video. It was a shape-shifting ritual. I got the ingredients. I made a kind of pelt for myself. I performed ritual to the specifications I developed from the old book I got hold of, and I had an experience that night. I felt a transformation. I was able to do things physically that I was not able to do in my ordinary state, and the after effects of that experience, the animal that was hunted by me in my altered state was really killed, and it was really killed by me, and it was burned as an offering for the remains. I mean, so these things have a power. These things have results, and those results have repercussions that come. I mean, some of the things that were used in that ritual, frankly, no one my age at the time should have been messing with, because they're dangerous. I'm not going to name them. What I think is odd It's a ritual that I based mine on. I found in what essentially was a children's book. I will tell you the difference between books and the way we thought of kids in the 70s versus books and the way we think of kids now. I don't think you can even find that book anymore, and I'm not going to name it. So, to fully comprehend the connection between werewolfery or being a werewolf and witchcraft, you gotta remember that in France, and yes, I'm harping a lot on France because, well, my family's from France originally. You didn't have as many witchcraft trials as you had werewolf trials, and that's because in France, and to a lesser degree in Germany, a particular witchcraft in the area was predominantly werewolfery. You know, people turning the wolves and eating other people's livestock or eating other people. Basically, hungry ass people resorting to desperate means to eat and sustain themselves and their families. I mean, I'm not whitewashing the situation. You're dealing with people willing to commit murder, essentially, or theft, using means that were, at the very least, socially unacceptable. And this was the one type of witchcraft, and usually it was assumed that if you knew enough witchcraft to become a werewolf, it was more than likely that you knew other kinds of witchcraft, such as storm raising, poisoning, casting of spells, making of charms and amulets, that kind of thing. I mean, in other words, in the old books and the old ways, that kind of witchcraft was seen as one part of a larger condition. Many of my books, 5 of my books to be exact, delve on this topic, and I'm not going to harp on them, but just pointing out if you want more in-depth details about methods and procedures as well as antidotes for werewolf-related witchcraft, my 5 books on the subject will cover that. I hope that this beginning intro has been interesting, and it is informative. And this new series, if you will be as entertaining for you all as it is for me to do it. So for that, I'll say thank you very much. Good hunting, and always mind the moon.
Thank you, Doctor, for what was a perfect kickoff to this new phase of your segment. A couple of things I want to take a look at in Doc's presentation. And the first one has to do with a very timely discussion of French werewolfery and its witchcraft components. I say timely because when the Winter Fox Journal's Book 2 comes out next week, I think you're going to find some of these things that Doc was talking about, namely the use of some of the more classic means to achieve transformation. And because the whole novel takes place in the middle of World War I, where Michael Winterfox is seeing action in Belgium and France, you better believe you're going to be running into some of these old werewolf cases and rituals. The other thing I wanted to recognize is the reference to magpies, which appear in the lineage, and that's the third book of the series, if you don't know. When Sylvester is dealing with Roma in Morocco and the witch hamlet there, the magpies are present as part of these people's dealing with supernatural forces, and they are agents of omen as well. In fact, if you take a look at Legends of the Werewolf Hunter Book 1 from 2001, there is a story in there by Rob Pegler called Magic Hour, which deals more with the occult significance of magpies. And we can look forward to seeing maybe some more of that with his spiritual sequel to that in the Legends of the Werewolf Hunter Book 2, which is we already talked about for tonight. The Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series showcases a variety of magical traditions: folk magic, shamanism, voodoo, to use the vernacular, and ritual or ceremonial systems. I, for one, am certainly looking forward to see what Doc has to say on each one of these subjects moving forward. So thanks again to Doc for his time and insight tonight. And if you're interested in learning more about Dr. Broussard, feel free to explore the information there in his bumpers immediately following his segment. Well, it's last call for alcohol, and I'm going to have one more nip of what is quite likely the cheapest creature I have ever bought. But it ain't rock gut. A couple of weeks ago, I was messing around with an idea that I turned into a poem. Now, to quote the Pina Colada song, I'm nobody's poet, because my idea of poetry is the stuff that rhymes on itself at least once a stanza. And having said that, the best poetry I've ever read has been by Robert E. Howard. And I realize that makes me a Philistine of some sort to those who take the art of poetry seriously, but I know what I like. His poems are always so visceral and brutal sometimes. The kind of stuff that you could put to music and charge into battle with. Anyway, huge fan, and I've been known to emulate Howard from time to time. And so when I had the idea to write something about Sylvester as a departed spirit, it didn't take me long to realize this was a tale best told in a poem in the style of Robert E. Howard. Take a look. The Woodsman's Ghost. In the chill of night, full moon aloft, through a haunted wood by an eerie croft, the woodsman tracks such moonlit floors as are whispered of in fireside lore. Whispers of wolven and tales of wrath, of vengeance which hunts its bloody path, of hatred from whence vengeance is born, within the darkness where nightmares form. His steps are quiet, his senses clear, a howl in the distance and a wicked sneer. A wolven cries through forests steep, and quickens its pace into shadows deep. In shadows deep where moonlight chokes, the woodsman hunts its birch and oaks, into ancient woods where myths belong, to pursue that melancholy song. Their lineage blood feud intertwined, he knows the rule of woven tide, with silver bullets and heart of scars, and great horned owl among the stars. With steady hand and steady breath, he takes his fight to the doors of death. He takes his aim, cold and stark, as howl resounds, their echoes mark. A blast of light, a burst of thunder, the beast black heart is rent asunder. Its silence at last has grown the louder, in a curl of smoke and a whiff of powder. The woodsman was a man of strife, troubled by shades of accursed life. Let night recede to breaking day, and the werewolf hunter fades away. Well, like I said, I'm nobody's poet, but I was pretty happy with how that turned out. There's something about the idea of some random backwoods hiker stumbling around on haunted ground ground that is visited by the ghost of SLJ. That's just kind of awesome to me. I hope you like it. And that'll do it for us this evening. Thanks for dropping by to have a drink with us. Be sure to like and subscribe on your way out. And remember, you can find us on the web at werewolfhunter.com, and you can drop me a line at brian@werewolfhunter.com. I'll see you next month here on the Werewolf Bar. But until then, happy hunting and mind the moon.